She was his daughter. Then she became his commanding officer. My father's company overbilled the Pentagon $847 million. My savings account had $4,200. I want you to hold both of those numbers. Last week, I walked into a federal benefits office in my Army service uniform Bronze Star, above my left pocket, 11 years of service. And the man at the desk told me my request needed authorization from a board dissolved 4 months ago. He read it from a printed form without looking up. I said, "I heard you." Then I placed the executive order on the counter. Behind me, a retired sergeant had driven 63 miles that morning, compression brace on his left knee, his wife's dialysis, 3 times a week, $420 each session. He had done the math in the parking lot. He had been doing it for 4 months. Same form, same dissolved board, same 14 to 21 business days, the software system that generates those delays. My father's company holds the service contract. I had known that for 7 months. I was not there about my benefits. I had an encrypted Inspector General drive in my bag and 6 hours left before the federal filing deadline. 7 months of case files on Harrington Defense Group. My grandfather's company, my father's company, my name. Tell me where you are right now, because the woman standing at that desk was carrying something no one else in that corridor had been told, and I am about to tell you all of it. 8 months earlier, Captain Victoria Harrington-Cole sat at a desk that had cost her $340 from a government surplus auction in Fairfax County. The desk was too wide for the room, a converted storage space on the second floor of a legal services building in Arlington, Virginia, 8 blocks from the Pentagon and 6 blocks from the coffee shop where she had eaten breakfast every morning for 2 years because the rent on the office did not leave room in the budget for a kitchen table. The overhead fluorescent bulb flickered at irregular intervals. She had stopped tracking them. The desk held 4 organized stacks of documents, a legal pad with 72 pages of handwritten analysis, a thermos of black coffee, her third that morning, and a laptop connected to a government encrypted external drive approximately the size of a paperback novel. The drive had been issued to her 9 weeks earlier, on the morning she signed a document she could not discuss with any person she knew. The document was 31 pages. It bore the seal of the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General. It made her, as of 9/12 that Thursday morning, Special Investigator, Case File, IGDOD 2024 CR0047, an active fraud investigation. Federal jurisdiction. The subject of the investigation was Harrington Defense Group, her grandfather's company, her father's company. The company whose name she had carried through every school enrollment, every security clearance form, every professional introduction since she was born. She was 33 years old when she signed. The encrypted drive contained 6 fiscal years of contractor billing records, $847 million in overbilled Pentagon contracts, invoice line items duplicated across multiple contracts, internal reconciliation completed before each Department of Defense audit cycle, time to a precision that took either luck or premeditation. She had read the intake summary twice on the morning of her signing. She had asked for 30 minutes alone. They had given her 45. At the time she signed, her personal savings account held $4,240. Her student loan balance from Georgetown Law School stood at $61,800. She had paid down $38,200 over 11 years on a JAG officer's base salary. Her apartment lease in Arlington ran $1,640 per month. Her car, a 2016 Honda Civic with 94,000 miles on the odometer, had been making a grinding sound from the transmission since January that she had decided not to have evaluated because the preliminary mechanic's estimate was $1,100. And she did not have $1,100 available that month without moving, something she did not want to move. She had not mentioned any of this to her father, not the car, not the lease, not the savings balance. The previous September, her cousin Renee had called on a Tuesday afternoon and asked if Tori could cover $800, a gap between paychecks, a broken water heater, a week she had not planned for. Tori had said yes before Renee finished the sentence. She had transferred the money that evening. She had eaten turkey sandwiches for the remaining 11 days of the month and had not mentioned it to anyone. She did not hesitate about the $800. The money went. This is who she was before the case file, before the encrypted drive, before she understood the complete architecture of what she had agreed to examine. The investigation had originated with a whistleblower, Patricia Oakes, 41 years old, Contracts Division Accountant, Harrington Defense Group, 7 years of employment. She had noticed, over the course of 18 months, a pattern in invoice processing. Line items duplicated across separate active contracts, the duplications reconciled internally before each quarterly Department of Defense audit cycle. The margin was consistent, between 8.3 and 11.7% above the contracted rate, spread across enough line items and enough contracts that no single audit flag crossed the threshold for automatic escalation. Oakes had filed her complaint through a third-party legal firm in October. The Department of Defense Inspector General Office had spent 6 weeks determining what kind of investigator the case required: JAG clearance, no financial interest in the company, existing security clearances at the appropriate classification level. And this was the part that had taken Tori 4 full days to absorb completely. Someone whose access to the company's administrative infrastructure would not, on its own, raise an immediate alert. Someone the subjects would not immediately recognize as a threat. They had chosen a Harrington. She had sat with that for 4 days. She ran 7 miles on a Tuesday morning with it. She lay on the floor of her apartment on a Wednesday night at 2 in the morning and looked at the ceiling until the decision clarified into something that no longer felt like a choice she was making, and more like a direction she had always been traveling without a name for it. Her mother had reported a contractor fraud. Quietly, through proper channels, was documentation. She had kept copies of everything in a manila envelope in the second drawer of the kitchen desk in their house in Alexandria. The contractor had lost the contract. 3 officials had been reassigned. The process had taken 4 months. Her mother had received the result by certified letter. She had read it at the kitchen table while Tori was doing homework in the next room. She had come to the doorway and said, "Set the table, dinner is ready," that was all. The lesson was not what her mother said. The lesson was what her mother did not need to say. Tori signed the document the next morning at 9:12. She took the encrypted drive. She moved into the storage room office in Arlington, and for 7 months she built the case from the desk that cost $340. The confirmation arrived on a Thursday morning, 8:47 in the morning. She was on her 3rd thermos of coffee. The message was 11 words: package accepted. Final report cleared for submission. Deadline, 1700 hours, Friday. She read it twice. She did not stand up from the chair. She moved the message to the case folder and opened the timeline document, 29 hours, final report. In-person submission at the Department of Defense Inspector General Office with physical documentation, not digital, not uploaded, in person, in hand. She could have sent a courier. Protocol allowed it. She chose not to. Because 8 months earlier, when the Inspector General intake team had first walked her through the geographic breakdown of the duplicate invoices, which contracts, which divisions, which offices had processed them, one of the processing locations was a floor of the Pentagon's E-Ring, the Contractor Administrative Services Office of Harrington Defense Group, where benefits claims were processed, where document requests were handled, where the same administrative architecture that had concealed $847 million was used daily for everything else. She needed to see it in person. On the day it mattered. She needed to know whether the system looked the same up close as it did in the data. She locked the encrypted drive into the portfolio. She checked the clasps. She straightened her uniform in the bathroom mirror and picked up 3 numbers she would carry with her for the next 11 hours. 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The Department of Defense Inspector General filing deadline. Miss it, and the investigation transfers to a Congressional Review Subcommittee. 2 members of that subcommittee's oversight board had attended her father's retirement gala 2 years ago. The delay would become a burial. 7:30 in the evening. Senate Armed Services Committee testimony on military procurement reform. 6 months to secure the witness slot. Her father's office had placed 3 separate calls to the committee chair's assistant in the preceding weeks. She had been told they were courtesy calls. She understood what they were. 9 o'clock in the evening. The memorial service for Margaret Harrington-Cole. 18 months since her mother had died in a hospital room with the television off and Tori's hand held in both of hers. The last words her mother said, not the last thing she said to Tori, but the last thing she said to anyone on this earth, were 4 words spoken without drama. In the voice she used when she meant something permanently: make it right, Victoria. The numbers were simple. The numbers were brutal. She picked up the portfolio and walked out the door. She was 11 years old. The year was 2001. The second Tuesday in November, it was 9:42 in the evening when the headlights of her mother's Buick LeSabre swept across the ceiling of the living room. That particular arc of light that Tori had memorized over 7 years of waiting. The arc that told her whether the car was parking straight, which meant an ordinary day, or at an angle, which meant something had happened on the floor. That night, the angle was wrong. Margaret Harrington-Cole came through the front door, still in her scrubs, dark green, Fort Belvoir Army Community Hospital, the name stitched in white above the breast pocket. She was 41 years old. She had been a military nurse for 16 years. She had worked a double shift that day, 14 hours on a surgical floor with a staff shortage, a supply transport mix-up, and a narcotics count discrepancy that had required her to stay an additional 45 minutes past the end of her shift to file the correction paperwork exactly right. Because Margaret Harrington-Cole did not file paperwork any other way. She did not say any of this. Tori knew it because she had been awake in the living room for 3 hours listening to the particular silence of a house that was waiting for someone to come home. Which meant she had spent 3 hours constructing every possible reason the headlights were going to come in at the wrong angle before they actually did. Her mother set her bag on the kitchen table, not her purse, her work bag. A canvas tote with a broken strap that her mother had repaired twice using a length of brown shoelace because the hospital's annual personal equipment allocation was $12 per staff member, and her mother had decided both times that $12 was better spent on something else. She took off her clogs. She ran the kitchen faucet for 30 seconds, washed her hands the way she always washed her hands after a shift wrist to fingertip, thorough, unhurried. The way someone washes their hands when the habit is so old it has become indistinguishable from character. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and opened the work bag. She pulled out a folder. "What is that?" Tori asked from the doorway. "Numbers that do not match," her mother said. Tori sat across from her and watched. The folder held approximately 40 sheets of paper, photocopies of invoice records from the base hospital's pharmaceutical supply contractor, a company called Meridian Medical Solutions. The numbers her mother had noticed did not involve a large, obvious discrepancy. They were not the kind of numbers that announced themselves. They were the kind that required the specific attention of someone who had spent 16 years reading medical documentation and had developed, over those years, a sensitivity to the space between what a number said and what a number meant. The base hospital was being billed for standard IV saline solution at $4.80 per 1,000 milliliter bag. The General Services Administration contract price for the same item was $1.12. Her mother had done the calculation on a legal pad and pencil, with the methodology written out in the left margin in her precise, unhurried handwriting. The difference across the hospital's quarterly usage was approximately $42,000. Over a contract year, $168,000. Over the remaining 3 years on the Meridian contract, just over $500,000. On a single line item, on saline bags. Her mother did not make a phone call. She did not send an email. She did not contact the base commander or the contracting office or her union representative or anyone Tori would later learn was theoretically available for exactly this kind of situation. She looked at the folder for a long moment with the expression Tori associated with her mother deciding something, not deliberating, deciding, which was different, quieter, and final. Then she went to the cabinet under the counter where they kept the spare printer paper. She loaded the printer. She sat back down at the kitchen table and began to make copies, not of the invoices she had already copied once before leaving the hospital, but a second set, systematically organized. 1 copy for submission. 1 copy to keep. She dated each page by hand. She initialed the bottom right corner of each one with her small, precise initials, MHC. She did this for 2 hours and 50 minutes. Tori fell asleep on the couch. She did not remember deciding to. When she woke, it was past midnight. The kitchen light was still on. Her mother had gone to bed. The folder sat on the kitchen table, organized and bound with a rubber band. Beside it sat a second folder, identical in thickness, labeled in her mother's handwriting on the tab, COPB, Do Not Remove. 4 months later, Meridian Medical Solutions lost the Fort Belvoir contract. A Department of Defense audit had flagged 6 separate billing irregularities across 3 base hospitals. 3 administrative officials had been reassigned. The investigation had originated with an anonymous internal complaint filed through a proper channel, documented correctly, processed exactly as the system required when the system was given no choice but to work. Her mother received the notification by certified mail on a Thursday afternoon. She read it standing at the kitchen counter. She set the letter down. She came to the living room doorway. "Set the table," she said. "Dinner is ready." She never mentioned it again. Not once. The lesson was not in anything Margaret Harrington-Cole said about what she had done. The lesson was in what she had not needed to say. That truth does not require an audience to exist. That justice does not require performance to be real. That documentation is not the act of someone hoping to be believed. It is the act of someone who has decided that the record will speak when they cannot, and who has made the record accordingly. That lesson did not leave her. It became the architecture of everything she built after. The encrypted drive in Tori's portfolio held 6 years of Harrington Defense Group billing records, $847 million. Organized, dated, cross-referenced, indexed by contract number, fiscal year, and invoice batch. Built on a legal pad and a $340 desk in an 8x10 storage room in Arlington, Virginia. Her mother had spent 2 hours and 50 minutes at a kitchen table with a broken strap canvas bag. Tori had spent 7 months. The scale was different. The method was exactly the same. The initials in the bottom right corner of every page in the encrypted drive were now VHC, but the handwriting looked the same. It always had. Today was the day the folder marked "Do not remove" would be opened in front of the people who had spent years pretending it did not exist. 11:03 in the morning. 5 hours and 57 minutes until the Department of Defense Inspector General filing deadline. The moment Captain Harrington-Cole placed the physical form back on Caldwell's desk, face up, the suspended board citation visible, Colonel James Whitfield moved for the first time since entering the corridor. 2 steps forward. Precise. Practiced. The movement of a man who had spent 11 years knowing exactly when to insert himself without appearing to have chosen to. Victoria. He used her first name with the warmth of someone deploying it carefully. Perhaps we could step into a conference room. There may be some administrative lag in the form revision cycle, and I would be glad to help clarify the correct current process. Clarify, she said, not a question. Form databases update on quarterly cycles. There is sometimes a delay between a policy change and the corresponding revision reaching all desks. Entirely routine. She looked at him. James Whitfield was 58 years old, salt and pepper hair. The posture of a man who had maintained physical standards for 34 years because he believed in them and because the alternative, in his world, was a kind of erasure. He had a daughter 2 years younger than Tori. He had stood beside her at her mother's graveside and said, in a voice that was not performing grief, that Margaret Harrington-Cole had been one of the finest people he had known. He had meant every word of it. He had also known about the trust amendment since 2019. For 5 years, he had said nothing to her, not a word, not a hint, not in a parking lot, not in a corridor, not in any of the 30-odd conversations they had shared in the years since the sealed envelope had been placed in his keeping by a lawyer he trusted and a general he feared. She had no proof of that yet, but she had the data, and the data had its own logic. "I am not in a conference room," she said, returning to Caldwell's desk. "I am here. And the form I was given cites a board whose authority was suspended 8 months ago, which means any request processed through this form in that period was authorized by a body that had no standing to authorize anything." Caldwell had stopped moving entirely. The woman in the blue cardigan at the far desk had not resumed typing. Sergeant Washington, in the waiting area, was watching with the stillness of a man who had spent 28 years learning when to be invisible and when that invisibility had a cost. 11:07 in the morning. Brigadier General Marcus Harrington entered the E-ring corridor from the south stairwell. He was 58 years old, 6 feet 2. His uniform occupied space the way command-level presentation does, not loudly but completely, as though the space had been designed around it. His service ribbons were substantial. His stride covered ground without appearing to hurry, which is one of the things decades of command teaches a man to do. He saw Tori. His expression did not change. That was the tell. A father who has unexpectedly encountered his daughter in a building they both work near has a flicker, something involuntary, the face relaxing briefly into recognition before composing itself again. There was none of that. His expression remained exactly what it had been when he came through the stairwell door. He had known she was going to be here. Victoria. He closed the distance unhurriedly, the step of a man who believes movement is a statement. His hand came briefly to her shoulder, the gesture of a parent placing a claim, not a superior acknowledging a subordinate. I did not realize you had business in this part of the building. I submitted my access request through standard channels last Thursday, she said. As senior board member, you would have received a copy in the administrative distribution. I receive a significant volume of correspondence. I know. He turned to Caldwell. The shift in his register was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the shift of someone who has spent decades understanding that the room changes before you raise your voice, and that the room changing is usually sufficient. Richard. Current status on the captain's request? Sir, the request requires Class 3 cross-agency review. Standard processing timeline runs 14 to 21 business days. I am familiar with the timeline. He turned back to Tori. His voice returned to the register he used with family, measured, reasonable, the voice of someone explaining something for the other person's benefit. The protocol is not arbitrary, Victoria. Contractor administrative files carry procurement confidentiality provisions under federal acquisition regulations. JAG access, even cleared JAG access, requires a pathway that protects active contract integrity. I would think, as a JAG officer, you would understand the importance of that. I do, she said. Then you understand why we follow the process. I do. Which is why I need the formal statutory citation for the specific provision under which my request is being denied. The Code of Federal Regulations section number. The contract reference it applies to. The name and office of the reviewing official who will be assigned the Class 3 determination. When a father gives his daughter procedure instead of an answer, is he protecting the system, or protecting himself from the moment the system can no longer protect him? General Harrington held her gaze for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a long time in the specific vocabulary of a JAG officer trained to read the space between what a person says and what a person's body does while saying it. She counted the seconds. Standard notification will be issued through the appropriate administrative channel, he said. Processing time, 5 to 7 business days. I am filing a time-sensitive report at 5 o'clock this afternoon. I indicated this in writing in my original request. 5 to 7 business days. Places any response 11 to 15 business days past the filing window. I am not in a position to modify the review timeline. I am not asking for a timeline modification. I am asking for a reference number, a Code of Federal Regulations section, a specific provision. That is not a classified file. That is a number. Something moved in the room. Not physically, nothing shifted in position. But the quality of the silence changed. The way a room's silence changes when everyone in it has simultaneously reached the same understanding and no one is willing to be the first to acknowledge it. Colonel Whitfield had taken a half step back. 2 inches, no more. The movement of a man recalibrating how visible he was willing to be standing next to something. Caldwell looked at the general. The general looked at Tori. 11:14 in the morning. 5 hours and 46 minutes until the Department of Defense Inspector General filing deadline. Richard, General Harrington said, with the finality of a man ending a meeting he had decided was over, please provide the captain with the relevant policy citations and notification of processing status. The printer produced 3 pages. Tori accepted them without reaching. She read the first page completely. The second, the third. She did not move from the center of the floor while she read. She did not lean against the desk. She did not shift her weight. General Harrington waited, Whitfield waited, Caldwell waited. Washington, in the waiting area, was still watching. On the second page was a reference to a case management system called Case Review. Contractor Administrative Services, Automated Intake and Classification Dashboard. The paperwork cited it as the mechanism governing initial claim tier assignment, which request received standard processing and which received the enhanced verification track. She had not requested to see Caldwell's monitor. She did not need to. The angle of the desk lamp placed at the corner of Caldwell's workspace, combined with the general's position 18 inches to her left, created a sightline to the screen that lasted approximately 2 seconds before her reading position would move past it. The CASR view dashboard was open. Color-coded. Claims in standard processing, white. Claims in pending review, blue. Claims flagged for enhanced verification, Class 3, extended timeline, the track that had returned Sergeant Washington's disability claim 3 times in 4 months, red. She counted the red claims in the 2 seconds she had. 41. She said nothing. She had seen the CAS review demographic flag rate analysis in the encrypted drive. She had the tables. She knew the statistical breakdown of what the color-coded system selected for and what it filtered out. And she knew that 41 was a number that belonged to a pattern, not to coincidence. She placed the 3 printed pages into her portfolio alongside the 2 documents that no one in this corridor knew existed. She looked at Richard Caldwell. "Thank you," she said. She looked at Colonel Whitfield. She looked at Brigadier General Marcus Harrington, chairman of the board of Harrington Defense Group, and said, "I will follow up through the appropriate channels." Her father nodded once. The nod of a man who believed he had closed a door. She had already turned, portfolio under her left arm. 3 printed pages from Caldwell, now inside the leather cover alongside the 2 documents nobody knew existed. She was moving toward the corridor exit. 12 minutes on foot to the Department of Defense Inspector General office. 5 hours and 43 minutes until the filing window closed. She had taken 4 steps when she heard it, not loudly, not with any performance. The voice of a man who had long ago learned to keep his requests inside a register that would not make anyone uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I understand what the system says. What I am asking is whether anyone in this office has the authority to look at the actual file. Not the flag, the file." Sergeant First Class Darnell Washington was standing at the adjacent desk. He had his veteran's identification in one hand, a manila folder in the other. The folder was 3/4 of an inch thick. It had a rubber band around it and a handwritten label on the tab in the careful block letters of a man who understood that paperwork was a language and had spent 28 years learning to speak it. The label read, Washington, D.R., VA Claim 2024-0471, Complete Documentation, All Pages. "Sir," the administrator said, and her voice carried the particular quality of someone who is performing a script they did not write and do not entirely believe in, "the CAS review system has returned your claim for enhanced beneficiary verification. I am not able to manually override a system-level flag. That requires a different process. 4 months, Washington said. 3 submissions, every form you asked for. Medical records, discharge papers, service history, every page, right here." He set the folder on the desk. "My wife runs dialysis, 3 sessions a week. We have been covering $420 out of pocket per session since the claim was first returned in July. We have spent more than $11,000 waiting for a system to read a file it keeps sending back without reading." The administrator looked at the folder, then at her screen, then at Caldwell. Caldwell was looking at his keyboard. Brigadier General Marcus Harrington was standing 8 feet away. He had heard every word. He did not turn around. Tori stopped walking. She stood in the center of the corridor floor and ran the calculation. Not the emotional one, the real one. The one that a JAG officer builds when the situation has moved past feeling and entered the territory of consequence. First clock. 5 hours and 42 minutes until the Department of Defense Inspector General filing window. Physical submission required. 12 minutes on foot. If she engaged here, if she stepped into a third-party case file interaction involving Harrington Defense Group administrative staff in the presence of her father, the encounter would not end in 12 minutes. It would end when the general decided it ended. And if it went further, if it involved military police, an incident report, a formal complaint, she could lose not 12 minutes but everything after noon. Second clock. Senate Armed Services Committee. 7:30 in the evening. 6 months to secure the witness slot. 3 attempts by her father's office to have her removed from the list. A public confrontation in the Pentagon today involving her Harrington Defense Group personnel and her father would hand his staff exactly the narrative they had been constructing for 3 months, that she was unstable, that she had an agenda. that her testimony on procurement reform was personal, not professional. She would still testify, but she would testify carrying that. 3rd clock. Her mother's memorial, 9 o'clock in the evening. The photograph her aunt had chosen for the display. Her mother in scrubs, Fort Belvoir entrance, mid-step, 1 foot raised, already moving. Her aunt setting up at 8. Will you be here early? Your mom would want you to have a minute before everyone arrives. The investigation. 8 months. $340. 72 pages of handwritten notes. Patricia Oakes, who had risked everything to file a complaint through a third-party firm whose name was not in any public document, whose job Tori had silently agreed to protect by keeping this investigation invisible for exactly as long as it needed to be invisible. When the cost of acting is this specific and this total, is choosing not to act a decision, or is it the absence of one? And is there a difference? She stood with all of it for 4 seconds. Then she looked up. Washington's hands were on the counter, folded, flat. The hands of a man who had run out of forward motion and was waiting to see if anything would happen differently this time. He was not crying. He was not raising his voice. He was doing the thing that long service teaches, the thing that looks like patience from the outside, but is something different on the inside, something that has no clean name. Something built from 28 years of being told to wait, and waiting, and coming back, and waiting again. Because what else do you do when the alternative is abandoning the only process available to you? He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a photograph. He set it on the counter, gently, not to show anyone, not as an argument, just to have it there, a woman. Mid-50s. Hospital setting, judging by the background. She was laughing at something off camera. The laugh was the full kind, the kind that does not know it is being photographed. He looked at the photograph for 1 second. Then he looked back at the administrator and said, very quietly, please. Tori walked forward. No announcement, no speech, no signal to anyone in the room that something had changed. She simply redirected. The way her mother had redirected, from the living room doorway to the kitchen table to the printer to the rubber band to the label that said do not remove. 1 foot, then the other. Colonel James Whitfield saw her move. He recognized what it meant the instant he saw it, the portfolio still under her arm, the slight adjustment of direction, the particular quality of purposeful movement that he had watched her mother produce in exactly the same way 30 years ago in a different building, in a different crisis, that also had no clean exit. He took a step. His mouth opened. 3 decades of military service had given him a vocabulary for exactly this moment, for the moment when a thing was happening and a word from him could still change what the thing became. His mouth closed. He stayed where he was. His silence was a choice. He made it in under 2 seconds and would carry it considerably longer than that. 11:28 in the morning. 5 hours and 32 minutes until the Department of Defense Inspector General filing deadline. Tori stopped at the edge of Washington's desk position. She did not address him first. She looked at the administrator. I would like to see the CAS review flag code on this claim, the specific code, not the category, the code. The administrator looked at Caldwell. Caldwell looked at the general's back. Ma'am, access to third-party case management data requires a different authorization level than. The flag code is not case data. It is a system classification. It is the number the system used to route this claim to enhanced verification instead of standard processing. That number is a public-facing administrative classification. I am asking to see the number, 11:31 in the morning. Brigadier General Marcus Harrington turned around. He walked back to the desk with the same unhurried stride, the same command bearing. When he spoke, his voice was the voice of a man who believed he was being entirely reasonable. Victoria. This claim belongs to a third party. Intervening in a case file that is not yours and not within your assigned purview compromises the procedural integrity of the review process. I know your intentions are good, but this is not how we do this. I am not accessing the file. I am requesting a flag code. You are inserting yourself into an administrative proceeding involving a party you have no standing to represent. He is a veteran with 28 years of service whose disability claim has been returned 3 times in 4 months using an authorization form that cites a suspended board. She said it at the same volume she had used for everything else in this corridor. No louder, no quieter. I am asking for a number. The general looked at her for 2 seconds longer than before. Then he turned to Caldwell. His voice dropped. Not enough. 11:36 in the morning. Tori's government-issued device produced a single notification. Her JAG personnel access to CAS review had been suspended. Administrative Review Protocol 7.4. Duration, pending clearance review. She read it. She put the device in her left jacket pocket. She did not change her expression. 11:39 in the morning. 4 hours and 21 minutes until the Department of Defense Inspector General filing deadline. Brigadier General Marcus Harrington straightened. He addressed the corridor, not loudly, but in the carrying register of a man who has spent 3 decades knowing where the acoustics land. This section of the Contractor Administrative Services Office is currently under administrative review. Personnel with outstanding access requests should expect processing through the standard notification queue. I want to thank everyone for their patience with the current procedures. Near the elevator bank at the far end of the corridor, a young specialist, mid-20s, civilian contractor badge, had been standing with his phone in his right hand for several minutes. He was recording. Washington was redirected by the administrator gently, carefully, in the manner of someone who understands they are participating in something they did not design and cannot stop and will not be able to fully explain later. To a chair in the waiting area. He took the photograph off the counter before he moved. He put it back in his inside pocket. He sat down. He did not look surprised. That was the worst part. He did not look surprised. 11:43 in the morning. 3 messages arrived on Tori's personal phone within 40 seconds of each other. The first was from Dana Cho, her attorney at the Department of Defense Inspector General Liaison Office. It read, IG physical window confirmed 5 p.m. sharp. No extension authority. You need to be in hand by 4:55 minimum. Are you en route, D? The second was from Mark Reeves, Staff Director for the Senate Armed Services Committee. It read, Tori, your name just flagged in a Pentagon building access query that crossed my desk. Everything all right? You are third witness tonight. 7:30. Chairman wants a clean hearing. Call me. M. The third was from her Aunt Carol, her mother's younger sister, who had driven 4 hours from Richmond and was already at the venue setting out photographs. It read, Sweetheart. We are getting set up now. I found the one of your mom at Belvoir, the one where she is mid-step, coming off shift. She looks so like herself. Will you be here early? She would want you to have a quiet minute before everyone else arrives. We love you. Come soon. Tori read all 3. She did not respond to any of them. She put the phone back in her right pocket. 11:47 in the morning. 4 hours and 13 minutes until the Department of Defense Inspector General filing deadline. She looked at the clock. She thought about the photograph her Aunt Carol had found. Her mother. Mid-step. Fort Belvoir entrance. 1 foot raised, already moving toward whatever came next, not because she knew what it was, but because she had done the work and trusted the documentation and set the table and said, dinner is ready, and that had always been enough. A promise made at a graveside has no administrative review process. It has no enhanced verification track. It has no 14 to 21 business day notification timeline. It has only the person who made it and every morning since, in which they either moved toward it or moved away. Which direction does 5 hours and 13 minutes point? She did not look toward her father. From across the corridor, 11 feet away, she heard his voice. He had turned partially from the group, phone to his ear, the posture of someone who believed the physical angle created sufficient privacy. It did not. She is still in the corridor. Yes, I do not know what she thinks this accomplishes. Have Whitfield walk her to the exit, quietly. I do not want this in a report. Keep it contained. A pause. Because she is my daughter, that is why, and I am not going to let her. Another pause. Then handle it. He lowered the phone. He did not turn around. Tori opened her laptop. She placed it on the corner of Caldwell's desk, the 4 inches of unoccupied surface at the left edge, without asking. She plugged in the encrypted hard drive. She waited for the connection to establish. She was not looking at her father. She was not looking at Whitfield. She was not looking at the specialist by the elevator who was still recording. She was looking at the screen. The drive connected. $847 million in overbilled Pentagon contracts, 6 fiscal years, invoice batch by invoice batch, all of it dated, all of it initialed, all of it ready. The clock on her laptop read 11:51 in the morning. 4 hours and 9 minutes. She opened the first file. She did not announce what she was doing. She turned the screen 45 degrees toward the center of the room so that everyone within a reasonable distance could see it without needing to be invited to. One gesture, no explanation preceding it. She opened the first file, Case File IGD OD 2024 CR0047, she said. Her voice had the register of someone reading a number off a document they have read many times before. Department of Defense Office of Inspector General, Special Investigator Commission, issued 8 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days ago, reference number on the upper right. Authorizing signature, Office of the Secretary of Defense. The Commission grants full investigative authority over contractor billing, procurement records, and administrative operations pertaining to Harrington Defense Group, its subsidiaries, and any personnel or processes operating under its administrative infrastructure, including Contractor Administrative Services (ERING), the floor we are currently standing on. She paused. She looked at Brigadier General Marcus Harrington. She waited. She gave him the specific number of seconds it takes for a person of his intelligence to process what he has just heard. Not the words, which he understood immediately, but the geometry of it, the shape of what it meant. She had learned from watching JAG hearings for 11 years that the most important moment in any proceeding is not when you speak. It is the moment you stop and let the room catch up to what you have said. She let the room catch up. What that means, General Harrington, is that for the past 8 months and 17 days, every action taken by Harrington Defense Group personnel in this building, every access denial, every policy citation, every CAS review flag, every form citing a suspended authorization board has been occurring inside an active federal investigation. Every document produced in this corridor today is now part of that case file, including the credential suspension issued to my government device at 11:36 this morning. General Harrington had not moved. He was standing precisely where he had been standing when she began. His posture had not changed. His expression had not changed. But something had happened behind his eyes, the specific rearrangement of a person who has just understood that the floor they are standing on is not the floor they believed it to be. She opened the second file, Harrington Family Trust, Amendment 4, notarized. March 14, 2019. Sealed. The amendment was drafted by your father, my grandfather, Edward R. Harrington, 11 months before he died. It transfers 51% controlling interest in Harrington Defense Group to Victoria Ann Harrington-Cole, effective on the date of her 34th birthday. My 34th birthday occurred 93 days ago. She let that number sit. 93 days. Under the Trust's Operating Agreement, Article 7, Section C, Paragraph 4, any board resolution, contract approval, or executive authorization passed without the consent of the majority interest holder is procedurally void from the date of that holder's qualification. In the past 93 days, your board has passed 11 resolutions, 3 contract renewals totaling $412 million, 2 executive compensation approvals, 1 subsidiary acquisition, all of them passed without my signature, all of them void. She turned the screen slightly so the document's notarization stamp was fully visible. This is not about today, General. Today is simply the day that someone was standing in this corridor with the data, the documentation, and the legal authority to act on both. General Harrington's voice, when it came, was quieter than it had been all morning. You planned this. You arranged to be here today specifically to. I requested lawful access to contractor administrative records and asked your staff to follow administrative policy. She said it without inflection. The decisions made in this corridor this morning were yours. She looked at Richard Caldwell. Caldwell was looking at the laptop screen. He had the expression of a man watching a building he has worked in for 9 years slowly change into a building he does not recognize. She turned to Colonel James Whitfield. 1 sentence. Colonel Whitfield. I need the full CAS review administrative log for this floor, 18 months of activity, complete export. Your office has access. I need it at my secure filing address by 1400 hours today. No judgment. No reference to the step he had taken back. No acknowledgement of the mouth that had opened and closed. Just the task, clean. The way her mother would have done it. Whitfield said, "Yes, ma'am." His voice was entirely steady. She turned to the waiting area. Sergeant First Class Darnell Washington was sitting in the same chair he had occupied all morning, the veteran's cap still on his head, the manila folder on his knee. He was watching her with the expression of a man who has learned over a long life not to believe something is real until it has fully arrived. She pulled out her personal phone. She dialed a direct line to the Department of Defense. Inspector General Claims Processing Liaison Office, a number that existed because a Special Investigator Commission came with certain access that did not require a form citing a suspended board. It rang once. She identified herself by commission number. She provided Washington's claim reference. She requested emergency manual review bypass under investigative authority, immediate. 68 seconds. She received verbal confirmation and a processing reference number. She hung up. She looked at Washington. She gave him the number. You will have a determination within 4 business hours. If you do not, this number, and she wrote a second number on the back of one of Caldwell's printed pages and placed it on the chair beside him, goes directly to the investigation as a compliance failure. Keep both. Washington looked at the numbers. He looked at her. He did not say thank you. Not because he was not grateful, but because thank you was not large enough and he was not going to offer something too small for what had just happened. He simply nodded once, the nod of one professional to another, and that was exactly right. She closed the laptop. She looked at her father. Fairness is not a moral abstraction in federal contracting, General. It is a compliance requirement. Institutions that process benefits and administrative requests equitably outperform institutions that rely on algorithmic filtering to manage accountability exposure by an average of 31% on contract renewal rates alone. The Department of Defense's own performance data shows this. You will find it in the report I will be filing at 5 o'clock today. I will make sure you receive a copy. She removed the encrypted drive from the laptop. She placed it in the portfolio. She closed the clasps. 1, 2, she looked at the clock. 12:04 in the afternoon. 4 hours and 56 minutes until the Department of Defense Inspector General filing deadline. Brigadier General Marcus Harrington did not leave the floor. He stood where he had been standing. After approximately 40 seconds, he walked to the far end of the corridor and sat down in the chair against the wall. The chair no one uses because it is too close to the exit and too far from anything. And he looked at his phone. He did not make a call. He was doing what intelligent men do when the structure they have maintained for a long time has just been shown to them from the outside. He was calculating the exact dimensions of what he had built and what it had cost and how long he had believed those two things were not connected. Richard Caldwell took the physical form, the one with the suspended board citation, off the surface of his desk. He held it for a moment. He opened the bottom drawer and placed it inside and closed the drawer. It was a small action. It was not nothing. The administrator in the blue cardigan was at her desk. She had been at her desk since 8:15 that morning. She had processed 9 claims this morning. She knew the CA Review flag rate on her floor was not random. She had known it for 3 months. She had told herself it was the system, not her. That they were different things. She opened the Department of Defense Internal Ethics Reporting portal on her secondary browser. She looked at it. She closed it. She opened it again. This time, she did not close it. Colonel James Whitfield was on his phone before Tori reached the corridor door. Get me the CAS Review admin log, floor CF7 E-ring, full export. 18 months. Every flag code, every routing decision, every override. I need it at the Inspector General's secure address by 1400. He ended the call. He stood for a moment without moving toward anything. It was a specific kind of stillness. The stillness of a person who has just done something they should have done years ago and who understands with complete clarity that doing it now does not undo the years in which they did not. His hands were not shaking, his voice had not changed, but something else had, something in the quality of the space he occupied, as though it had become slightly smaller than it was before and would remain so. In the waiting area, Darnell Washington held the 2 numbers. He did not put them in the manila folder. He put them in his shirt pocket, the one closest to his chest, and left them there. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and took out the photograph. He looked at it for a moment. His wife, laughing at something off camera, in a hospital hallway that looked like it smelled like antiseptic and fluorescent light, and the particular smell of someone fighting to stay on the right side of a line. He put the photograph back, he stood up, he walked to the exit. By the elevator, the young specialist had stopped recording 12 minutes ago, the moment the laptop opened. He had watched the full sequence. He looked at the last frame of footage on his phone. The corridor, the laptop screen, the two documents, the general's expression at the moment the trust amendment appeared. He opened a secure transfer application. He addressed it to a reporter he had exchanged 3 messages with over the past 2 months, a journalist at a national publication covering defense contracting accountability. He typed 4 words in the note field, "Thought you should see." He hit send. He put his phone in his pocket. He kept his face completely still. He pressed the elevator button. Tori pushed through the corridor door. She did not look back. Not at her father, not at Whitfield, not at the specialist, not at Washington, not at the room or the desk or the laptop or the 43 minutes that had just permanently altered the geometry of several lives, including her own. She was already counting forward. 12:06 in the afternoon, Department of Defense, Inspector General Office. 12 minutes on foot. 4 hours and 54 minutes until the filing window closed. She was already moving, the way her mother was always already moving in that photograph. 1 foot raised, Fort Belvoir entrance, something just ahead that she had not yet arrived at, but had already decided to reach. Tori took her phone from her right pocket. She called her Aunt Carol. It rang twice. "Tori!" "I am on my way," she said. She ended the call. She walked into the light of the Pentagon's outer corridor and did not slow down. 3 months later, Colonel James Whitfield submitted his retirement paperwork 6 weeks after the corridor. Not in 14 months, as scheduled. 6 weeks. Before he left, he completed one task that was not assigned to him, was not required of him, and could not make up for the 2 seconds in which his mouth had opened and closed. He wrote a new internal review protocol for the CAS review flag system, a mandatory manual audit requirement for any veterans benefits claim flagged for enhanced verification 3 or more times without resolution. He wrote it himself. He submitted it through official channels. It was adopted within 30 days. In the first 2 months under the protocol, 847 flagged claims were manually reviewed. 312 were approved that had previously remained in the extended verification track, some of them for over a year. He retired to Annapolis. He teaches a constitutional law seminar at the Naval Academy 1 morning a week. He does not talk about the corridor. But on the first Tuesday of every month, he transfers a specific dollar amount to a Department of Defense Veterans Benefits advocacy organization. No note. Same amount. Every month. You can see it sometimes in how he pauses before answering a student's question. The kind of pause that is not uncertainty, the kind that has a different name and does not go away. Brigadier General Marcus Harrington. The investigation did not close in a week. It took 4 months, due process, as it was designed to take. An independent review board was convened. 3 additional billing frameworks were discovered beyond the original $847 million, 2 subsidiary contractors operating under duplicate invoice structures connected to Harrington Defense Group through secondary contracts. When the investigation closed, the total figure across 9 fiscal years was $1.3 billion. General Harrington was not criminally charged. The evidence established institutional design, a system built to obscure rather than individual criminal intent that cleared the bar for prosecution. He resigned from the Harrington Defense Group board. His security clearance was suspended pending ongoing review. He received a formal letter of censure from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He is not in prison. He is living in Alexandria, Virginia, 3 miles from the house where Tori grew up, and he is 58 years old. And every morning he wakes up in a world that now contains a $1.3 billion figure attached to his name in a federal document that will not be sealed. The investigation found no evidence he had known about the trust amendment. The lawyers believed him. Tori believed him too. That was its own kind of thing to sit with. Sergeant First Class Darnell Washington. His claim was approved 72 hours after the corridor. $1,430 per month, full service classification, not the reduced rate CAS Review had assigned. Retroactive payment, 11 months at the corrected figure. His wife's dialysis is covered. They did not move to the smaller apartment they had begun planning for in August. They stayed. He went back to the corridor once 3 months later. Not a complaint, a supplemental form. 4 minutes at Caldwell's desk. Processed without issue. On his way out, he passed the administrator's station. She was on the phone, walking someone through a CAS review appeal, explaining the new manual review protocol in a voice that had lost the practiced, laminated quality it had carried in July. She did not look up, but taped to the side of her monitor was a printed copy of the protocol. The edges were starting to curl. It had been there a while. Washington did not stop. But he noticed. That was enough. The institution. The Contractor Administrative Services Office was placed under independent administrative oversight within 6 weeks of the Inspector General report. By the end of month 3, 847 flagged claims manually reviewed under the new protocol. 312 approved that had previously been held in extended verification. CA's year-use demographic flag rate differential reduced from 34% to 8%, with the 8% currently under a separate audit. Harrington Defense Group's 3 voided contract renewals retendered to open competitive bidding for the first time in 11 years. 2 subsidiary contractors identified through the investigation's secondary review, combined contracts of $460 million placed under hold. These changes were not announced as reform. They were implemented as compliance. That distinction matters. Reform is something institutions perform for an audience. Compliance is something they are required to maintain regardless of whether anyone is watching. One of those things lasts. The video. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Shot on a personal phone. Pentagon E-ring corridor. Uploaded to a national outlet's secured tip portal the afternoon of the incident. Aired 3 days later. 14.3 million views in 72 hours. Within 1 week, 3 veterans advocacy organizations submitted formal complaints to the Department of Defense citing CAS Review's flag rate data. Within 3 weeks, the Senate Armed Services Committee announced a formal inquiry into CASR Review's algorithmic design and its demographic impact. 2 members of Congress introduced the Automated Benefits Accountability Act, requiring independent audit of all algorithmic processing systems used by federal contractors in benefits determination. The bill is in committee. It may not pass this session. It may pass the next. Captain Victoria Harrington-Cole. She did not take a seat on the Harrington Defense Group board. She retained a restructuring firm, 8 people, all cleared, all credentialed, and assigned them operational governance while the voided resolutions moved through adjudication. She did not want to run a defense contractor. She had never wanted to run one. What she had wanted, for a long time, was for it to stop running itself in the dark. She is sitting in a different office now, not the storage room in Arlington. She moved in October, after the report filed, into a space with a window and a kitchen and a desk that cost considerably more than $340. On the desk, 1 photograph. Her mother. Mid-step. Fort Belvoir entrance. 1 foot raised. Already moving. She did not put it there for inspiration. She put it there because it is accurate. She made it to the memorial at 8:47 in the evening, 13 minutes before the program began. Her Aunt Carol had arranged the photographs in a semicircle on a long table. The Fort Belvoir one was in the center. Tori stood in front of it for 4 minutes. She did not cry. She did not speak. She stood with it the way you stand with something true when the moment is finally quiet enough to let it be true without defending it or explaining it or needing it to mean anything other than what it is. Then she turned and helped her aunt move a table. What she kept from the corridor that day was not the trust document, not the Inspector General commission, not the expression on her father's face at the moment the screen turned. She kept a question. A question 47 pages of statistical analysis had not quite made visible until she saw Washington's hands on the counter flat, still having run out of forward motion, and understood that the data had been telling her something the data alone could not tell her. She is still holding it. What happened in that corridor was real, not a parable, not an illustration, a set of decisions made by specific people in a specific building on a specific morning that produced specific, measurable outcomes. A man received his benefits. A system was placed under audit. A document was filed at 4:58 in the afternoon. Numbers changed. These things happened. They can be verified. They are in the record. And she proved something. She proved that accountability is possible inside a system that was built to avoid it. She proved that documentation is a form of power that does not require permission. She proved that the truth, submitted through the correct channel, at the correct time, with the correct authority behind it, can make a room reorganize itself around what is actually true instead of what the room has agreed to pretend. She proved all of that, and she only could because she had 2 specific documents in a leather portfolio that no one in that building knew existed. Without the Inspector General Commission, she was a JAG officer in a corridor asking questions that could be managed, procedurally, indefinitely, by a man with 4 keycards and 9 years of practiced answers. Without the Trust Amendment, she was her father's daughter, which, in that building, on that floor, was a category with known dimensions and a known ceiling. She won because she had the document, and the standing, and the 11 years of legal training, and the name on the building, and the Bronze Star, and a grandfather who had in 2019 made a decision she did not know about until it was the only thing standing between the system and the dark it preferred. What about the 41? The 41 red claims on Caldwell's CAS review dashboard that morning. What about the claims before them, the ones processed in the months before a laptop was placed on a corner of that desk? What about the floors that do not have someone with a commission in their portfolio and a sealed trust, and a morning they decided to see the system up close before they filed against it? How many buildings have a floor like that one? How many dashboards have an algorithm that no one designed for discrimination, and no one audited for its effects, and no one questioned because the people it was affecting had the least standing to compel anyone to look? How many Darnell Washingtons drove 63 miles this morning and sat in a plastic chair and folded their hands on the counter and held a photograph close to the chest, not because they were giving up, but because they have spent years building the specific endurance of a person who knows the process will return them what they put in and comes back anyway? Because what else do you do? How many of them are there in the buildings we do not have footage of? The truth does not require an audience to be true, but a record without someone to submit it, and someone with the standing to have it received, is a record that stays in the folder marked "Do Not Remove." And the question Margaret Harrington-Cole never said out loud, the question she answered every morning by getting into the car and going to the floor and initialing the bottom right corner and coming home and saying, "Set the table. Dinner is ready." That question is still open. It is still the most important question in the room. At Revenge Files, Story 3, we do not soften the story or smooth out the edges to make it easier to walk away from. We tell powerful fictional narratives inspired by real documented systems. Systems that millions of people navigate every day without a trust amendment and without a commission and without 11 years of JAG training and without a grandfather who thought to seal an envelope in 2019. If today's story moved you, if it made you think, or made you see a corridor you have walked through differently, hit like, leave your thoughts below, and subscribe so you do not miss what we tell next. Because the conversation this story opens is not the one that ends when the video does. It is the one you carry out the door.